Welcome, everyone. My name is Alyssa Silva, and I am the programming manager for American Jewish University's Office of Open Learning. I'm thrilled that you are here, and I am thrilled that we have Etgar Keret with us today, someone who is on the ground in Tel Aviv, who can share with us some anecdotes from what's going on in Israel and also from his many years of writing, and share his stories and his family's stories, and hopefully the stories of Israelis today as well. Just a little bit about Edgar before I take it over to him. He's an internationally acclaimed writer of short stories, rarely extending beyond 3 or 4 pages. So for those of us who, don't like to read, that's great. Edgar's stories fuse the banal with the surreal, the banal with the surreal. Keret's best-selling books offer a window on a world that is both dark and comic. Keret is also the author of a memoir, The 7 Good Years, in which he contemplates moments of his life against a backdrop of constant conflict. Keret's new book of stories, Fly Already, won the prestigious Sapir Prize. Keret's work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The Paris Review, and those are just among many other publications. And he's a regular contributor to This American Life. Very accomplished. We are so thrilled to have you, and we're thrilled that you are safe. Share a little bit with us about what it's like in Tel Aviv right now, and how are you?
Thank you. I just want to say that if you saw my wife entering, she basically said that they are expecting a rocket attack in the next I don't know, hour or so. Okay. So I'm saying if there will be one, I'll have to go to the shelter, and I'll be back as quickly as I can. Maybe I can use a connect from my phone there or something.
Okay, safety first.
Right. Yeah. So what can I say? I think that these past 10 days have been probably the most difficult days of my life, and I think that this is true for almost any person I know. Speaking about my mom and my parents, it reminded me that when I was a child and very naive and didn't know a lot about life, I asked my father very innocently if the Holocaust was the worst period of his life. And my father, who would always take any question very seriously, thought a little, and he said, the way I see it, there are no good periods in life or bad periods in life. There are difficult times and there are easy times. And he said, me, like everyone else, I always loved the easy times. But I have to admit that it's the difficult times in which I've learned about myself the most. And I think that Israel is going through the most difficult time it ever had. And I feel that it's also an opportunity for us, to question our thoughts and our debates and our fights and basically understand where we are living. I don't think there was one person in this country who woke up in the morning of the 7th of October and said, oh my God, that's what I thought was going to happen, Nobody. And I think that it doesn't matter which side of the political line you are in or what are your opinions. Many people were surprised or broken, disappointed. I can tell you, 3 minutes before I got online, I talked to a neighbor who had who would make these robotic classes to places that are less developed and teach children how to build robots. And he did this project with a group of Arab children for years, and they were like a family. And those children flew and competed and won the world championship in robotics. And he said, and today I just look at their Facebook pages and I see that they put pictures from the massacre and smiley faces, and he said, they're like my nephews, So the idea of really not understanding reality around you. I can say for myself, for example, in all the past conflicts, I would always say, it's Israel against Syria. It's us against them. Now I look and I realize that it's Iran against the US, and Iran uses proxies, and this had really nothing to do with what's happening. And then, or when I saw the reactions of some of the universities, or I don't know, Starbucks workers, or when I see a picture of a homosexuals for Hamas, I just remember the idea is if you're a homosexual in Gaza, they will probably throw you from a rooftop and murder you. So, homosexual for Hamas, it's really like, I don't know,
bit of an
steaks for
oxymoron.
overweight people, so I must say that a lot of things in the way that I see the word are being challenged and are being questioned. And I think that it's a good time for every person living in this country, or every person who's interested in Israel or in this region, to keep their old views, but be open for the fact that probably, there's some changes that needs to be taken, and things that need to be thought about again.
Also, I want to note that in the description of this program, we had talked about, it's World War II stories with Edgar's mother. We will absolutely touch on that, as I'm sure there's a lot of connections that we can make to now versus then, unfortunately. And so we will get there, but we do want to ensure that we talk a little bit about what's going on in Israel as well. So thank you all. Edgar, as a writer, how are you using your talents to perhaps, help those in Israel, or, how is being a writer, making a difference right now?
Well, I must say that, that since the war had started, everybody asked me, what did you write? Can you send us what you wrote? And with me, there is something about writing that it's like an airbag in a car. Mm-hmm. It's like when things get rough, I have to write a text, to protect me from reality. When I'm very sad, when I'm very happy, when I'm in a place that I don't know, it's not even controllable. I just write. And I wrote through COVID and through terrorist attacks and through rocket attacks. And basically, since this, in the past 10 days, I was unable to write. I wasn't unable even to read. It's really the feelings that I have. It's as if like, if you light a fire, you need to have some oxygen. And if you write, you need to have some kind of humanity or some kind of an optimistic sentiment in the air. And this was sucked. So I don't feel that I function as a writer. I function like as somebody who doesn't drive well, who doesn't cook well, and who has very few talents. So basically what I do is I give a lot of interviews to overseas publications, about the situation in Israel. But what I do is me and my wife, we go to people who were evacuated from kibbutzes, from Otef Aza, and we do all kinds of events. We try to read for children. I try to read for grown-ups. I do readings to soldiers before they're sent to Gaza, I meet elderly, I go to elderly home and talk with elderly people that there was something in what they saw that kind of reminded them of the Second World War, and that I have to deal with missile attacks. So I think I'm kind of like this quack advisor or psychologist, I just go and speak with people, but I don't have any proficiency for that. But I think that, there is something about even like the situation where I sit with people and I read them a story, that it's kind of a reminder of a different reality. It's kind of a proof that there is something else out there. And the stories that I hear, in these meetings, they're heartbreaking. The people that I've met from Kfar Aza, for example, they have such dignity and such respect that it takes you a very long time to understand, what they've actually been through, you know.
Yeah.
So when you hear a daughter saying, trying to comfort people and saying that she saw photos of the body of her father, and that she could see that he wasn't tortured, and that everybody should find positive sentiments in the fact that he was just murdered but not tortured, you know. It's like when I entered this place, you know, we were there for more than 4 hours. There was a woman going with us, showing us everything. You know, everything is so hectic, and I didn't even ask her for a name. And she was carrying a baby, and the baby, you know, for the 4 hours she was doing everything, and the baby didn't cry. And before we left, you know, we said, wow, like, no, this baby is amazing. And she said, oh, it's not mine. It's there is a woman that her family died, and she's basically, she cannot function. So somebody said, can anyone take the baby? So I took the baby. You know, it's really, so this kind of feeling of some realities that is very misleading, because you know, those people, they don't come and cry and beg and they complain, you know. But when you get close to them, you can get a glimpse of the horrors that they've been through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are there any, so you shared that one story. Do you think that in the future you're going to compile any of these stories for the world to hear?
I'm trying to write them down, and I don't know, it's really like, all of them, they seem in many ways, I wouldn't say trivial, but you know, they cannot, I feel that my words can't grasp what was going on, but what I want to say is that, you know, it's really like, I was sitting in the balcony earlier on, and I hear the child of the neighbor crying and shouting at his mother, and he says, I don't like you, I don't like you. And then the mother says, but soon daddy will come. And he says, I don't like dad either. He says, both of you like the soldiers more than you love the soldier more than you love me. And you realize that, you know, in such a situation, there is such a big change that suddenly, you know, I saw a father and a child going the street, and the children, they like to imitate the voice of the rocket siren. They go, oh, you know, and you sometimes you can see parents losing it, you know, and the child doesn't understand what, you know, what's going on. So I'm saying, there is something very bare and emotional and like, I don't know, painful in the situation right now, you know, and I think that, you know, it will take a very long time to even just digest what had happened.
Yes, no, 100%. I see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A function.
Yeah.
One individual, Erica Dreyfus, she said that she's a big fan. She's a Substack.
Oh, I know her from my Substack.
Oh, amazing. So
Hi, Erica.
She's doing an undergraduate course on contemporary Jewish short stories. And she, on the syllabus is bedtime story, every generation, etc. But she's curious if you suggest alternate, or additional stories, especially now. Any other comments that I might convey, that she could convey to her students who are very diverse, who know very little about Israel or Jewishness? Do you have any suggestions for resources?
Well, it's funny. I know what I've been looking for and kind of to reread, you know. So I found myself reading Isaac Babel, The Red Cavalry, and which is, I know that it's in Russia and it's in different time, but it's basically, a lot of it has to do with the horror of war.
Yeah.
And I must say that, you know, if anything, you know, this very much, the incidents here very much reminded pogroms. So I don't know. So I found myself going to that, but for me, whenever there is war and violence, I find myself going for texts like there's nothing new in the Western Front, or Slaughterhouse 5, or all those books that are kind of, or Catch-22, because I guess, I don't know, like there is all the good books about war that I've read were anti-war, you know, so maybe it's a good thing when you're sucked into this position to fight your war from an understanding that it's better not to be in this situation.
So fighting war and hate with anti-war and peace narratives. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another question that we have, Nomi Walksberg asks, is your son asking questions about all this? And if so, what are you telling him? I'm not sure what.
Well, my son right now is almost 6 foot tall, with blue eyes and muscly body. So he's not a child, but I think that we find ourselves talking a lot about all these ideas and conceptions. Let's say, what's the connection between the Hamas and the Palestinian people, you know, or how much the Hamas listens to the Palestinian street, which it doesn't, but it doesn't matter. But I think that it's, for me, it's kind of this, I find myself again, you know, because my son is much wiser than me and kind of knows a lot and read a lot. I find myself again in this kind of a position where I kind of have these dialogues that you usually have with younger kids. Yeah. When your father explains to you things about life, because, you know, when it comes to Zoom and placing a camera and I don't know, connecting to the internet, my son is the grown-up in our home. But I think that, you know, he was able to pass most of his life without really sinking into this region, you know, without being too interested politically, just thinking that, you know, life are gonna stay the same. Well, yeah.
Will life ever be the same in Israel after this?
For sure, it will not be. And I think that, you know, that we had one of the most difficult years in Israel, you know, even before this war with Netanyahu and the political and the trying to take off the Supreme Court and I don't know, the judicial revolution or whatever they call it. So I think that it was for the first time in the history of Israel where you really, really felt a rift, and you really felt that feeling that, you know, that political leaders were inciting one against the other, you know, and I'm saying, you know, and this idea of a government that doesn't represent more than half of the people was very, very powerful, and this kind of finger in the eye feeling of basically we will not help any of you was really at the heart of this year. And now what happened, if you look at the map of Israel, you have Gaza Strip and you have Judea and Samaria. So in Judea and Samaria, it's the occupied territories, it's the base of this government, it's the settlers. So 2/3 of the army forces were in Judea and Samaria, and only 1/3 in the Gaza Strip, which is a part of Israel, an undisputed part of Israel, and which in it you have all the people who basically demonstrate against Netanyahu. So the idea of those people that, you know, that they were neglected, that they were, everybody was guarding the settlers while they were left wide open, it really is a continuation of a year in which, you know, government ministers insulted the Air Force pilots, you know, ministers called the chief of staff Wagner Force, you know, ministers, you know, called the American president names, you know, the feeling was really as if they're kind of, they're saying, we don't need any of you. We don't need you in reserve duty. We don't need your pilots. We don't need American support. We know everything, you know, and now, you know, the anger that comes from the protester side, you know, it's really, I think it's contained as the war goes on, but it's really, it's unprecedented. And now we're currently in a situation where you have many wounded and orphans, and most of the government ministers, for the first week, none of them would meet anybody, but most of them won't even try to get close to them, because they think that if they go to hospital or something, they will be cursed and sent away. And this is what happened to two ministers. Both of them are from the extreme racist right wing, that they came to visit, and people say, we don't want you to comfort me. We just want you to go away. You want me to feel good? Leave the government, and, you know, and let us get our old life back. So it's really the energies are very difficult at this time. You know, I'm saying, you know, and on the other hand, you know, it's war and everybody helps everybody and everybody's volunteering and preparing food. But at the same time, you have this kind of a bitter feeling that at least a big part of this country feels that the government doesn't care about its needs, about its pain, you know. But we go, you know, we'll endure. The thing about us that we're so good enduring. Really, we're champions at enduring.
Yeah, absolutely. We are champion survivors, gold medal winners at survival. There's a comment or a question in the chat that kind of is in the same vein of what you've just been talking about regarding the Supreme Court, democracy in Israel, etc. And like you had said, right after the fact, this has happened. Israel's borders were infiltrated, mass murder. Also murders and deaths on both sides now, right, in Gaza, in Israel. So where do we go from here when it comes to unity as a state of Israel? And is there room for feelings of sad or feelings of anger, or even just feeling terrible for the Palestinians that were caught in the way? Can we feel for everyone and be unified?
Well, the way that I see it, I think that the entire country is shell-shocked. You know, it's a post-traumatic disorder, but on a national scale, because, you know, with thousands being killed, 1,000 being wounded, you know, in such a small state, smaller than, I don't know, New Jersey, and, you know, and with so many people that survived, you know, by hiding under piles of bodies, or as they saw their loved one dying. So I really think that whatever happens right now, it's not very lucid and rationalized, and it's just very spontaneous. And you know, you could see it with the families of the kidnapped, because, you know, a majority of them says, do whatever you can to bring our parents or children or partners home. But some of them are saying, whatever happens, you know, even if they kill my son, I don't want one terrorist to be freed for him. And, you know, and to make this even more complex, on the other side, you have the Hamas. They don't even say who they have and who they don't have. And that they want all the murderers of the Hamas and all the prisoners of the Hamas to be liberated automatically. So I'm saying you hear many voices, and I think that, you know, that you have people demonstrating and speaking against Netanyahu. You have extreme right-wing fascists that physically attack, you know, or curse even families of people who were kidnapped, you know, if they demonstrate against Netanyahu. But my feeling is that all those things are just the extreme edges of it, and that the majority is basically trying to digest, understand what they did, and hoping that this will help to heal the ripped society that was ripped in this past year, and create something new out of it. But what I really feel is that that, for example, the way that settlers will be seen by big chunk of the Israeli society had completely changed, because I think that if, let's say, I think there will be more tensions with ultra-Orthodox after this government was trying to get all kinds of misogyn laws, racist law, all those kind of things. So the healing process will take time, but I do think that it's some voices in the extreme that kind of make it seem as if you look at the other side, that they are crazy, they are far away. I think that you feel it many times between Republicans and Democrats,
Yeah, very true.
I mean, maybe if you're a Democrat, you could say, the Republicans, they wear horns and they go into the Capitol, and they do mess, and somebody say, Democrats are in Antifa, they shoot people in the street. But the bottom line is that 99% of the people, they just have different views, and without a media or social media that just echoes something that is so extreme, I think that, that they have disagreements that can be talked about, and I hope
as well. I think we all hope for that. Looking at your commentaries and your writing on World War II, we have a couple questions regarding that, and then its connection to the war going on now. So the first question is, what are your thoughts on the use of Holocaust terms and discussion of the current war in Israel? Like when folks are comparing or using that as an example.
So again, with me, it's funny, but all my life, I find myself kind of getting back to things that my parents had told me, or things that so I remember when I was a child, I came back from school and I said to my father, asked me, what did you learn in school today? And I said, they taught us the lesson of the Holocaust. And my father said to me, the Holocaust was such a big, horrible, emotional filled incident engulfing the entire world. You think that there's only one lesson hiding in it? He said, I bet that there are many lessons to be taken from it. And I really think that my father all his life was never in this kind of position, don't compare things to the Holocaust and stuff. He was just saying, like, whenever you see a reality, see if there's something that useful in it, something that you can use, and if comparing is helpful, it's helpful. But the thing is that people use those comparisons in an unconvincing way. I'm saying it's a legitimate metaphor if you have something or a connection to put to it. And I'm saying, it's really like when people say that the Hamas are Nazis, then I say, well, to the best of my knowledge, Nazis were not religious fundamentalists, and when they killed Jews, they wouldn't post it on Facebook, so obviously there is a difference, and I think that the inflation of using those comparisons makes them something that is really kind of useless and sometimes even disgusting. But in nature, I'm all for comparison if this comparison offers something that we can deduce something new out of it.
Yeah. So you touched on a story of you and your father, in conversation, and we're getting a few questions here, and people would love to hear some stories of your mother and of World War II. Would you be willing to share some of those right now?
Of course, if it's okay, I'll read a couple.
Yeah, please do. Absolutely.
Great. So actually, the first one I picked is just because it's a more easygoing, and I felt like I want to read something that is more easygoing.
Sure thing.
So this text is called the languages. My mother could speak 6 languages. Since my father also read and wrote in a similar number of languages, as a child I thought this was a commonplace, and that languages, just like facial hair, was something I would naturally grow when I got older. Polish and Yiddish were my mother's native tongues. French she learned in the orphanage in France she was sent to with other Jewish children after the war. Hebrew and English came when she made it to Israel as an illegal immigrant. She'd learned German as a little girl when her father insisted on teaching her during the war. This might save your life, he explained. It's much harder for people to deny your humanity when you speak the language. My mother listened and studied diligently. One day in 1995, the phone rang at my parents' house. The courteous caller said he was from the German Ministry of Culture and wanted to invite me to speak at an event in Frankfurt. My mother, who introduced herself as my secretary, refused to give him my phone number, but agreed to relay a message. At first, they'd spoken in English, but as soon as he mentioned that he wanted to invite me to Germany, my mother switched to German. Later in the conversation, he explained that in fact he was originally from Poland, but had immigrated to Germany as a boy. Poland, my mother replied in her perfect Polish. I apologize. If you told me sooner, I would have spoken to you in Polish from the beginning. When I arrived at the Frankfurt event and met the man from the Ministry of Culture, he politely complimented my writing, but he seemed far more impressed by my private secretary than by my work. I know from experience how hard it can be to hire a secretary with such a proficiency in so many languages, he gushed. How did you find her? I don't know, I replied with a grin. I just opened my eyes, and there she was.
Beautiful. Thank you. There's a question here that says, I'm wondering whether you can discuss your work, which is so darkly comedic. And I feel like after that story, it's, you can hear it in that one. Do you use this dark comedy as a response or within the context of trauma? And are there other stories that you've written that you would frame that way?
I think, there is something about humor that the way that I use it, it's not conscious. It's reflex, it's like if somebody will get close to my eyes, I will blink,
Yeah.
And I think that in a sense, it's both a protection mechanism and can also be a weapon. I think that, traditionally humor is the weapon of the weak. That's why we have Jewish humor. It's really like, they have this, it's not a funny joke, but I think it's a very telling joke. That they say that, that in the shtetl, in Eastern Europe, a Jew goes on a very narrow pavement, and in front of him comes this big Cossack. And the Cossack said, I never step off the pavement and stand in the mud for a stupid, ugly person. And the Jew steps into the mud and he says, that's strange, I do it all the time. And the idea is that when the Cossack will get home, his clothes will be clean. And when the Jew will get home, his trousers will be dirty. But the humor would make it bearable. And I think that this idea, is the fact that we make jokes about, I don't know, our teachers, our bosses, death, while death and our bosses don't make jokes about us. They don't need to. They can fire us or kill us, It just shows you how there's something about humor that helps you both save your dignity and cushion your emotion from the reality out there.
Do you mind sharing another story?
Yeah. a razor. When I was a child, my mother hugged me all the time. All mother hugs their kids a lot, I know, but my mother hugged me more than a lot. I liked it. But over time, I began to notice that when she touched me, it was always with the back of her hand, never the palm. One evening at bedtime, my mom finished telling me a story and then stroked my face with the back of her hand. Mom, I asked her, how come all the other moms touch like this? I demonstrated a caress with the palm of my hand, and you're the only one who touches like this. I demonstrated again with the back of my hand. My mother smiled and kissed me on the forehead. When I was little, she said, I didn't have a home like you do, only an orphanage. And the people there, some of them didn't always want to be good to me. So to be on the safe side, I stuck a piece of gum to the palm of my hand, and I lodged the razor blade in the gum. She showed me how she stuck the gum to her hand and then inserted an imaginary blade into that invisible gum. When she finished, she held the back of her hand to my face and caressed me gently. This, she whispered, is how I touch the people I liked. And this, she let the palm of her hand hover millimeters from my face without touching it, is how I touched the ones I didn't like so much. The palm of Mom's hand was so close to my face that I could feel its warmth. The blade didn't touch me, but I knew it was there. Palm of the hand, back of the hand. Until that evening, I never knew they were so different.
Thank you. As we know, it took 2 to 3 generations post-Holocaust to really start writing down these stories, talking about it. Immense trauma took time to heal from, if you will, and just to be able to talk about it. Do you believe that what's going on in Israel right now, there will be a similar effect afterwards? And how long do you think it will take for those who've been affected by this trauma to talk about it and to write stories?
I think it's very, very difficult to compare both, because it's different eras. I think in the time of my parents and even me as a child, the whole idea of complaining, showing your pain, even asking for help, were things that that people try to refrain from doing, and they didn't want to be whiners, complainers, in that sense, I think that today the legitimation of speaking and telling things, even things that in that time were seen as shameful, is I think it's a huge change. And also, the people like my parents, they've been in ghettos for 6 years, basically totally conquered. And what happened in Israel was this huge, unbelievable and super cruel pogrom, but it was one day. Now we're fighting a war, and it's also horrible, but it's more standard. But what happened was this kind of idea, of course, the images and the thoughts of a mother trying to hide her baby, people begging for their life, people being burned alive in their houses. It sends us to darker periods, but I think that here it will be different, and I think that also here, I hope, the communities will stay together, won't be displaced, they'll stay in the country, and hopefully, we can hug them and support them, and also tend to ourselves and heal from it together. It's not people who find, my mom finding herself in an orphanage in Poland where, I don't know, people, a non-Jewish orphanage in which people just try to steal her food and rape her, and she has nobody to go to because all her family are dead. Here, I'm saying, sadly, there are funerals of entire families that got murdered, and you see them full of people that didn't know them.
Yeah.
but they just feel the need, to go and be there. So I do think that people will speak about it sooner, and again that there are some elements that can be compared, but the Holocaust was
Yeah, absolutely.
something else.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one more question, and then if you'd like to share another story, we would absolutely love
Great.
that. Do you consider yourself a Jewish writer and Israeli writer, both, neither, or something else?
I always say that I was asked they have this podcast called Unholy, that is a Jewish a Jewish podcast, and they asked me, they told me three things. They said, you're a man, you're Jewish, and you're Israeli. In what order would you put it? So I said that for me, in my case, it's easy because the man thing we can throw out of the window. It's not in the equation. I don't think I ever was a man. I was like kind of. And the Jewish and the Israeli thing, there's no doubt about it. I'm first and foremost a Jew, and secondly, Israeli. The idea is that can I imagine a future in which I won't be Israeli? I mean, this past week it was easy to imagine a scenario in which Israel will not exist. But I'm saying, but even then, I will still be Jewish. And I think that there is something about it that if I look at the root from which I came. So yeah, I came from a community, a town, a country, but the first root was my family, my parents, and their upbringing. This idea of Jewishness is something that I really, really feel that is in my veins, and many times I find myself in argument with people in Israel saying, how about you be a little bit less Israeli and a little bit more Jewish, By the way, Israel is compared to Jews, Israel is very good at high tech. Jews have much better sense of humor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can read the text. I'm thinking together, like, let's say I have a few choices.
Okay.
So I can read another text about my mom. I can also read the text about my dad, which is longer. So I don't know.
I mean,
maybe
we have time for you to do both if you'd like to do both.
So I'll start with one about my mom, and maybe for the ending, I read the one about my dad.
Okay, great.
So this one is called a Good Day. When I was a kid, I absolutely loved eating at restaurants. In those days, in socialist Israel of the 70s, going out for dinner was such a rare and decadent event that it was impossible not to get excited about it. Once every few months, we'd drive to Victor's Place, a Tel Aviv eatery located next to a junkyard. After dinner, while mom and dad sipped Turkish coffee and smoked a cigarette, my brother would take my sister and me on an exciting tour of the junkyard, which we called the car cemetery. We'd stop at each crumpled vehicle and try to guess how it had ended up there. Trampled by an elephant, shot out of a cannon, or just driven too quickly and rammed into a stoplight. One Saturday, when I was about 6, we went to Victor's Place for my mother's birthday. The waiter was an older man with a mustache, and he informed us apologetically that due to a kitchen malfunction, the restaurant would not be serving fries. The rest of the family received this news with indifference, but I took it really hard. Instead of a big pile of delicious greasy fries, the waiter put a dish of white rice on the table. And within seconds, the lavish feast I'd been looking forward to for weeks turned into just another family dinner. My mother, sensing my frustration, asked me if everything was all right. Nothing was all right, I snapped. If I couldn't have fries, The whole meal was a waste of time. And this birthday, which was supposed to be fun, was now the worst day of my life. Mom listened patiently to my complaints, and when I was done, she put the back of her warm hand on my neck and asked me in a half a whisper to tell her how many people were sitting in the restaurant. Being a good boy, I methodically counted them all. Saturday afternoon was one of the busiest times at Victor's, and beside our tables there were 26 diners. 26? My mom exclaimed with a whistle. That's a lot. Now, could you please tell me what all those people are holding in their hands? Oh, come on, I said with a grin. That's easy. It's a restaurant. They're holding knives and forks. Mom was impressed. 26 people, 26 hungry human beings sitting at the table, each eating only what's on their own plate. 26 people holding knives, and yet not a single one of them is stabbing anyone else. She leaned over, planted a soft kiss on my forehead, and said, let's agree that this is a pretty good day. Yeah, I think if something about this story is that I think that a lot of my perspective of life, I think the one that is also in my writing, but even in the ways that I see life, really comes from this big shadow of the Holocaust, this understanding that that the reality as you see it is fragile and can turn on you in a second, is actually the mechanism of most of my stories. Because if I go, I don't know, to a diner, then I say, oh, what's going to happen if, I don't know, the waiter will start throwing pancakes at me, because the idea was that as a child, I understood that the world we are living in is one option, but it's a facade, and that when something radical will happen, all these things will be shaken, So in a sense, we've had a joke this week that that my son said, grandma and grandfather had been preparing you for this war since the day you were born. It's like, because in this idea that the way that I see reality and all those kind of instincts are one of a son of survivors, I guess.
Do you think that's unique to you, or do you think that's kind of the country's narrative?
I think that the second generation narrative and the Israeli narratives are very different, because this idea of the Israelis, like the Sabra, the straight shooter, the Dugri, tell you the truth in your face, and it's basically, there is something about the model which I could say is a very American model. My word is like an oak. I'm a strong guy. Don't mess with me. Well, I think that that what comes from a second generation home is much more the idea that people have more than one identity. Sometimes people feel unsafe to show their identity. The word can be friendly, and then it can turn. It's really like, I think, let's say my parents, maybe I said I read a story about my dad, it's in the chat so you can read it, but maybe I read another story about my mom and tell you what is still in me, all my life, even though, I've never been through anything remote to what my mom had gone through. So I read this text, it's called Cabbage Field. I only heard my mother's stories about the war once. She never told me them again, and I never asked her to. All except for one story, which I begged her to tell me over and over. It's a memory of hers from the early days of the war. The Germans were about to enter Moschonov, and my grandmother decided, as did many residents, to take my mother and her little brother and leave. As my mother tells it, they walked as fast as they could, fearing the Germans would soon catch up. By my grandmother carrying a baby in her arms, and my mother could not keep up with all the other locals who were fleeing the village. The people rushing past them got further and further away until they disappeared around the bend. And the only person matching their slow and steady pace was a tall man who walked a few yards ahead of them with an enormous pendulum clock strapped to his back. My mother was delighted by the giant clock and thought it very fortunate that even here in the middle of the countryside, on a dirt road winding its way through endless fields of cabbage, she could always tell what time it was. After walking for a long time, the clock and its carrier began to slow down. Just as they had almost caught up with him, the tall man fell to the ground with the clock still on his back. My mother and grandmother were also exhausted, and when they saw a vehicle coming towards them from some distance, grandmother told my mom they would have to hide. They ran into the field, and my mother's little brother, clearly startled by the sudden dash, began to cry. They lay down on the ground among the cabbages, and my grandmother breastfed her whimpering son. She knew they hadn't got far enough from the road, and that the sound of a crying baby would give them away. The three of them lie silently in the middle of a cabbage field while the baby nursed. My mother said that she felt a brief sense of peacefulness. For a moment, all the overwhelming anxieties and fears gave way to a word with no malice, no hatred, no danger, a word in which there was nothing but them and the damp soil and the cabbages. But then she sensed a figure blocking the sunlight. She looked up and saw a German soldier with a helmet and a rifle, watching transfixed as my grandmother nursed her child. Grandma saw him, but she did not know what she could do or say, so she simply ignored him and continued to breastfeed. Mom said the soldier stood over them for a long time, then turned his back and walked away, leaving the mother and her two children in their own world, a world of cabbage. Now, I think as a child, I always loved this story because in my story, it was basically like how a little girl and a baby and a woman, they were able to scare off a big guy with a rifle with a bayonet, So this was kind of my story about, which is another way of saying that humanity can prevail in places, in places that you wouldn't accept it to prevail. But listening to the story, that the things that I got from it was the part of this guy with the grandfather clock, the guy that was going with the pendulum clock and falling. What I got from this story was that anything that you're attached to will encumber you one day. If you collect stamps, you'll need to run to the shelter with your albums. If you collect books, you have to do it with your books. You can see behind me how many books I have. Not a lot. And the idea is usually with me, when I read a book, if I like it, I give it to somebody else. If I don't like it, I get rid of it. But the idea of keeping things seemed all the time to me kind of futile. It was almost risky. It's like smoking cigarettes, getting attached to physical object. Where at the same time, everything that you can keep inside your head, every proficiency that you have, every piece of knowledge, every image that you have, it weighs nothing, you can run it through the field and nobody can take it away from you. So I think that there was a lot in this kind of trying to process what happened from the Holocaust that kind of led me to this idea that thinking and imagining was a good thing, because this was something that will never encumber me or kind of stop me from escaping any dangers.
Absolutely. Such an interesting way to think. And I think a lot of folks maybe don't connect with that. But if you grow up in a family or in a culture or people of trauma, then that does make a lot of sense, right? It's also a very Buddhist value that you have there. Nothing is finite, right? You build
I'm saying, my mom told me many stories, and this one story that I cling to is basically a story about a Nazi that, in spite of all the things that the word Nazi says to us, look at the human beings and basically, and acts like a human being. And I think that maybe this was the story that I wanted to hear more and more, not because I wanted to think nice things about Nazis, it's just because I wanted, in this kind of idea of extreme reality, we remind ourselves that, that in all those conflicts, there in some layer, there is humanity, there is hope, there is some ability to change. So, for 6 years old, it's something that important to hear again and again.
Yeah, no, we want to see the humanity and the good in everyone, even if it's, our mortal enemy, which we have to keep hold of, especially during this time. I'm going to ask one more question, and then if you would like to share another very short story, we have about 4 minutes left. Norm says that in many of your stories, you combine two conditions or events that somehow influence the reader, that they belong together as a message. Do you plan these magical combinations, or do they just happen as you're writing the story?
Well, it's funny because I'm sure that this is something that is very true for my stories, but for sure it's not something in my process. So I'm actually is it a reference, for a specific story or for all my stories?
Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem, yeah. Okay, so Yad Vashem, maybe I can tell the story in a few words. It's basically a story about a couple. The woman is a Jewish American. The husband is non-Jewish American, and basically the relationship is falling apart, and the woman wants to leave the man, and the man, in some kind of a desperate act, or to do something, that because he always refused to go to Israel, he buys him and his wife tickets to Israel, and he believes that doing that will save their marriage. And they go on a tour of Yad Vashem, that through this tour, they discover, let's say, how they drove apart, how they are not together. And basically they break apart in Yad Vashem. And it's all about this idea of how can you feel sorry for yourself, in the shadow of all this pain. So it's really like a story about an incident that is kind of, I wouldn't say mundane, but that we know from our life. We had relationship, we separated it, and then put it next to something that is tragic and huge, and saying, how can you, in the story, when his wife leaves him, he cries in Yad Vashem, and then a Japanese tourist come and comfort him, and he says to him, it's you can't understand what can people do to other people, and the woman, she's sure that she is dying because of the 6 million that is crying because of the 6 million that had died. And I think that there is something about let's say a story like that. In the bottom line, it's a story about me. It's the story about a child that would never cry in front of my parents, because every time, it doesn't matter how painful, I hurt my forehead and I needed 14 stitches. The doctor thought that I had brain damage because I would not make a sound because my parents were in the room. And all the time I would measure my pain to what they had been through, So this idea of kind of trying to feel sorry for yourself, or to shout or complain in this shadow of great tragedy, I think this is really the mechanism in the story. And I think that I have other stories in which I make incidents meet parallelly, and I think that what usually happens is that one of them is something that we know, the other is something that extremes that we don't know. But putting them together, it's as if like each of them puts his or her shadow on the other incident. It's really like you're supposed to look at Yad Vashem differently after you see those two couple breaking, and you're supposed to look at couples breaking differently after you put it in the context of Yad Vashem and what they've been through.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Yeah,
Went too fast, but thank you again for being with us today. Please stay safe. Our hearts are with you in Israel. And yeah, and thank you so much. And we hope to have you again.
you know, even the Hamas didn't want, were listening. You see, no missiles during the Zoom.
Exactly. They would have been excited about the program. Amazing. Edgar, thank you. Those who joined us, thank you for joining us
Thank
here at
you.
AJU Open, and we will see you next time.